5:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is the meeting of the Anderson Township Board of Zoning Appeals, and it's hereby called to order. This board was established pursuant to Section 519.13 of the Ohio Revised Code and by the Anderson Township trustees to provide administrative relief to any person or entity adversely affected by the Anderson Township zoning resolution. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Brian Noah.
Here.
Here. Fred Hayes.
Here.
Rick Oversmith.
Here.
Brian Johnson.
Here.
Okay, and we'd like to thank everybody for coming to the meeting this evening of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Please do be aware that the meeting is audio and videotaped. It may be carried live on television. And I'd like to briefly outline the procedures. A summary of the appeal is presented by staff, Ms. Hodson. Then the appellant will present its case. The board members may then ask questions to the appellant. After that, all persons supporting the appeal will be permitted to testify one at a time after being recognized by the chair. When those persons supporting the appeal are finished, those opposed to the appeal will then be permitted to testify and/or ask questions of the board after being recognized by the chair. All persons wishing to testify for or against an appeal may do so only after being sworn in. When testifying, each person must come forward to the podium after being recognized. You can come to either podium. Speak into the microphone, state your name, address, and any affiliation to the case. All persons testifying, probably won't need to do a time limit tonight, so we'll skip that. Testimonies to the board only. Ask that comments or questions not be directed to the appellant or anyone else in the audience. The board would like to hear new non-repetitive evidence. If you'd like to show support for previous testimony, you may do so following the testimony procedures and stating their support of previous testimony. And we do swear everybody in, so will all persons who may give testimony this evening please stand, raise your right hand, and swear or affirm. So if you think you might testify, please stand up. Just if there's any, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, thank you. Please be seated. And do we have any adjustments to the agenda tonight?
The agenda you all received in your packets had a typo on the case number of Case 56-2014. It's actually just Case 6-2014, so corrected copies in front of all of you.
Okay, great. All right, so Allison, could you please read us the staff summary for Case 6-2014?
We've got to do agenda and minutes first.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, it's approved. And approval of the minutes of June 5th, 2014. Is there a motion on the minutes?
Second.
Motion and second. Is there any discussion on the minutes changes? All in favor?
I'll abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. And now let's go ahead and have the case summary. Thank you.
Sure. So like I said, this is Case 6-2014 BZA. The applicant is David Rose, and it's 7866 Riverby Drive. It's zoned AA residential. And the request tonight is a variance allowing a 17-foot rear yard setback for a single-family residence, where 60 feet is required per Section 64.3 of the zoning resolution. This is a location map. The highlighted property is the subject property this evening, and you can see the surrounding zoning here is all AA residential. The site is approximately 1.096 acres and has 72 feet of frontage on Riverby. There's a steep increase in grade from east to west, and the existing use is a single-family home. We have an aerial photo of the site in question as well. So the applicant is proposing to demolish this existing single-family home. This home was granted a variance to have a rear yard setback of 45 feet in Case 1192 BZA, and they would like to construct a new single-family residence with a rear yard setback of 17 feet. And for your reference, this is kind of a flag lot off of Riverby. This is considered to be the rear yard area, while this is the front, and both of these are sides. The existing home was constructed in 1986, and an addition was constructed in 1993, which is granted the variance to have the rear yard setback of 45 feet. Also in 1993, a zoning certificate was issued for a deck located in the front yard on this side of the home, as well as a garden wall located in the rear and the removal of a portion of this driveway. The driveway removal and the garden wall were not occur. This is a proposed site plan, and I've highlighted, to make it a little more visible in the PowerPoint, the existing home's location as well as the outline of the new proposed home. You can see they are primarily in the same location, though the garage of the new proposed home is what requires this rear yard setback variance for the 17 feet. We also have proposed elevation drawings. And moving on to photos of the existing property, you can see some of the similarities in location and overall size and massing from the existing home to these proposed elevation drawings. This is looking south towards the Ohio River at the existing home. And again, south, you can see this decrease in grade. This is looking west at the existing landscaping, which is the rear yard area. And again, northwest in the rear yard area, this would be the proposed location of that garage structure. Staff found that the essential character of the neighborhood would not be substantially altered, and adjoining properties would not suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance. The proposed variance is for a residence that matches the existing architectural style of the current home and fits in character with the neighborhood. It will not increase in height over what is present, and the change in elevation from this home site to properties along Sunny Acres should ensure that it does not impact their view of the riverfront. The proposed orientation of the home is such that it will sit behind adjacent residences on Riverby, as we can see in the aerial photo there, rather than in front of, so it should not impact their view of the riverfront either. The variance would not adversely affect the delivery of government services. The property owner's predicament cannot be feasibly obviated through some method other than a variance. The steep topography of the site limits the potential location of a structure. The proposed location offers the least disturbance to the hillside and existing vegetation by locating on the most level portion of the site. And finally, staff found that the spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed and substantial justice done by granting the variance. While the rear yard setback is requested to be reduced, the property will maintain a large area of open space within this side yard portion, as well as preserve the existing vegetation.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff?
Yes, I have one. Allison, could you highlight for us where the township green space areas are?
There actually aren't any township-owned green space areas in this portion.
The surrounding
Yes.
conditions say that there are, but I was wondering where they were.
Are they more zoomed out than that we can do?
This is parcel to the east.
This,
That
Okay.
one behind it.
I was thinking is the cursor still up there in this location?
And so the current driveway goes across the township green space?
Into a portion of, yes.
So there was a previous easement there, is that what's going on? Okay. And the second question is, it may help us to understand the technicalities here of the front yard versus the side yards versus the backyards here. The backyard setback would be, or the side yard setback would be required to be 25 feet.
Correct.
Whereas the rear yard is 60 feet by our current resolution.
In the AA district, side yard requirements are 25 feet, whereas the rear yard is 60 feet. And it's not, in this instance, the home's front is kind of facing what is their front yard. We get some where it's not oriented the right way. But here, yes, this front of the home would be the front yard, whereas this is side, and this portion is the rear.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Not right now.
Okay, I've got one. So, yeah, help me, if you can help me orient on this. I'm looking at this topo drawing. So, where we have the 37.11 mark, well, if you go back actually to the photo, where we have the 37.11 marked on the topo drawing, can you put your arrow where we're talking about on the aerial photo there?
Right here to the south of the residence.
Okay, so I need to orient it like that?
Exactly.
Okay. And so, to accomplish this site plan, they just need that, and then could you put your pointer where the 17 is
Yes,
to there? And they have, it's supposed to be 60, there's a 45
There was already a
in
variance for
place,
45.
and now it's proposed to be 17? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Is the applicant here? Would you like to come forward and present your case, please?
I'm David Rose, and the owner it's 7366. On the staff report, it says 7866, but it's 7366 Riverby Drive.
We've got it on the agenda, correct, so thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
And really, the staff report, without being repetitive, pretty much sums up our case very well. We're just bought the property. It's a challenging site. The builder wants us to stay right in that area, and for us to go to a single-level living with the garage there. If we put the garage where that current loop is in the driveway, and right now there's a carport, then we're all one-level living as we age. So, the hill is already reinforced. Going up there, there's a 4x4 lattice structure all the way through that back hill, which is the rear yard where we want the 17-foot variance, and then that's trees all along there. And then it's 600 feet to get up to Ken Oaks, Kevin Osterfield's property up there. So with those trees, they don't even see us. Kevin Osterfield can see the very top of our roof line. And he was just noting, which isn't part of this variance, that he'd rather us not go any higher, and we don't plan to go any higher than the current roof line. So it's really well hidden. It's really tucked in there in the forest.
Any questions for Mr. Rose?
I have one. So the new house will have a bigger footprint than the old house.
So slightly.
Okay, so are you going to change any landscaping or vegetation, take any out?
There's a concrete driveway that goes into the garage right now that's in the basement. So our garage is in the basement right now. So if you look where the Expedition is there, that will be gone, and that'll be vegetation rather than a concrete driveway. So we'll be adding to the vegetation, actually. That retaining wall will also be gone.
Mr. Overschmidt, did you have a
Yes,
question?
This is a three-level house?
Yes, walkout basement, and then 2 bedrooms on the second floor.
So the need to bring the garage up to the same level when you've got a three-level house, I'm missing the...
Well, it's for single-level living is what our plan is, so that we don't have to go up and down stairs all the time. And that turnaround is just kind of wasted space right now, so you'll be able to walk from the three-car garage right into the laundry, kitchen area.
And the drawings that were submitted, I think, my eyes are bad, but I don't think my eyes, can't tell the height of the,
Our architect just gave us some plans in case we needed that, so he's got a basic one elevation here with the height, if you need to look at that.
and that height includes the hip roof?
Yes,
Goes to the hip
yes.
roof? And what's the height? And we might ask you to submit that because that might be important to us. What's the height shown on the highest point?
From the mid-grade level, it's going to be 30 feet. And right now, the existing house is about 29.6. So it's 6 inches taller. And I think the county restrictions are 35 feet and 2.5 stories for township.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Bechtold, did you have a question?
I was wondering about, what about any excavation? Is it still going to stay on that same level? So there's going to be no excavation for basement?
That's about the only level spot we have. So the current basement the new basement will be where the current basement is.
To keep clear of any erosion once you disturb?
Right, right.
Build on that question. So the existing poured foundation is going to stay in place, and you'll add to the...
Well, they're going to have to change that a little bit, but I think they'll probably demolish the existing foundation, but it will be on the exact same site because that's where the level ground is.
Okay.
So instead of a 2.5-car garage down there, we'll have a little bit more living area down there.
You mentioned that you're trying to bring it up, you were trying to mention, or trying to bring your current house up to code. What kind of changes were not code that were impractical?
Well, I think it's just a 27-year-old house, so I don't think the deck is code now. It's got a cantilevered out and doesn't have, we started off with renovation and they didn't like the way that deck looked. So the new deck will be all the current codes. Anything else? I forget. Shelley? That was it.
I was wondering if we could, Allison, could you bring up the photo of the elevations? Okay, so that bottom right photo, which is the rear of the house, that is going to be facing where they need the variance. So, can you bring up the aerial photo again? Or the aerial, I mean. So can you point where that...
Bottom right elevation would be this one.
So
Oh,
it
it's
faces the
going-
river now.
Oh, okay.
And then this garage area is what's proposed to be in this location.
Okay. And the front is going to be where? This is very confusing.
Well,
So this is,
I didn't know that there was colors on the existing house versus the proposed house. That's, I think, what threw us off.
So the front elevation, Allison,
is this one.
well, it says the rear on it, though.
It's, I guess, the rear of the home because they'll be entering through this side, but this
Yeah.
is their front yard elevation, whereas this is their rear yard elevation.
Rear of the house is the front of the lot.
Gotcha.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So go flip back to the the aerial. Okay, so
So rear of the house and front yard area is this.
okay, and where's, so in the front
Front of
side's
the
on the other
house
side, you're going to
is
loop
the rear
around to
yard.
get to it or something?
Yeah.
They calls the front door.
Okay. That makes some sense to me, because I was thinking of that, it appears to be 3 stories. I'm like, why would you face that back to the back side of the hill? But, okay, getting it slowly. Is there any other questions for the applicant right
I
now?
have one other question.
Yes.
So what the code says is your side yard, which has most of the space, kind of going, in this case, I guess that's heading to the north. That is not flat enough to allow the house to go that way?
On which direction are you referring to?
The big, it's called your side, it would be the site right there. There is not a flat location there?
That's where the driveway comes up to the site, and it's pretty good grade up through there. And there's also the septic's there, the LP tank is there in that area.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions right now?
I have one other one, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I finally have figured out this drawing where the existing house to be raised is kind of nestled inside the drawing for the new structure. This 10 feet, is that the new deck that you're planning on putting on? I guess it's the rear now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This area.
Okay.
So the rear elevation is in the front yard, right? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Mr. Rose. We might have some more later on.
Okay.
Now, I forgot to mention, you can go ahead and have a seat. I forgot to mention that there's a couple familiar faces in the crowd. I just wanted to note, it does not create a conflict, but I do know Mr. Trout from professionally, and having seen him in some of these land use things. We don't have any other relationship. And Mr. Osterfeld, of course, used to be on this board. We know, several of us know him from this board. He's no longer on this board. He's welcome to participate as a resident, but I did want to mention that for the record. Okay, thank you.
And as I disclosed to the chair, I have a close friend and sometimes client, and I don't know what capacity today, in the audience, Mr. Early, so I have to judge my ability to
Of
stay
course.
involved in this case.
So I apologize, forgot to mention that at the beginning, but we do like to bring these things up. Okay, so we heard from the applicant, thank you. And is there anybody here that is desiring to speak in favor of the application? Yes, sir. Would you come forward and give your name and address, please?
Good evening. I'm Dan Early. I live at 7351 Riverby. I am a resident on the opposite side of the Rose home. I strongly support the variance request. I think the proposed home will add significantly to the overall community, certainly add to the tax base, and I am not aware of anyone in the subdivision that has any objection to the proposal.
Very good.
I might also
continue.
mention, by way of disclosure, I have had the great fortune of serving as the unelected volunteer president of a non-existent homeowners association on Riverby for 18 years. We are in the process of establishing a formal incorporated HOA and redoing 35-year-old covenants. That's probably going to take another month or two to get finalized, but I think it's important to disclose that upcoming fact. We hopefully in the future will be a better governed community than we have in the past. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Early?
Yes.
Hang on, Mr. Early, might have a question for you, actually.
Effectively, you spoke for the neighbors. Do you stay in close touch with all of the neighbors as you are reassembling this and formalizing this homeowners association?
Yes, I have regular contact and many views that are being expressed as we evolve the development of documents. So I'm quite close to the neighborhood.
And has this come up in discussions in particular?
From a few.
From just a few?
Right.
And they are all positive?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Early? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're on proponents. Anybody else like to speak in favor? Yes, sir. Please come forward. If you could state your name and address, please.
Sure. My name is Stan Messerly with Mesco Engineering. I live at 2766 Wasson Road in Cincinnati. I'm here representing John and Monica Adams, who own the parcel of land to the north of the proposed carport. And just wanted to inform the board that John and I had a conference call with Mr. Rose yesterday, specifically concerning my inquiry into the applicant's intent of the stability of the existing hillside, which supports the parcel of land that my client owns. And the applicant's informed us that, you know, and I don't see any proposed grades on this plan, but he's informed us that his intent's not to cut any existing earth material that exists out there. In other words, he's going to follow the existing grade, and he's assured us of his intent to stabilize that existing hillside. So we're comfortable with that response.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Messerly?
And yes, can you help us understand exactly where that
it's at 7320 River by.
Could we see the aerial maybe, and you could maybe put the cursor on that?
If you show the one that, yeah, there's the parcel land, the tax map, or it might be better to give you a feel. My client owns the parcel to the west, right there, yeah, exactly.
I thought you had said the parcel to the north.
Well, I'm sorry, I did. I was incorrect. To the west, you're correct.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So you don't represent any ownership of the property to the north?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Messerly? I have one. I heard Mr. Rose mention in his remarks that I think he referred to it as existing lattice, and that he's not going to get into the hillside. Is that the same thing you're talking about? And what is the existing lattice?
It's an existing retaining wall system
wall.
here. That's in place, yes. And again, without seeing any proposed grades on the proposed site plan, I was not certain whether or not he had proposed cutting into that hillside, and he's assured us that he's not going to, that's not part of his plan.
So you feel that if they leave that retaining wall alone, that's not going to compromise your client's property?
The land currently appears to be stable, so I am of the opinion if he doesn't do anything to cut into that existing land, it'll remain stable. But, you know, if he gets out there and starts cutting into the toe of the hillside, you know, that's a different story.
I'm sorry, what is the toe of the hillside?
The bottom of it?
I know what the retaining wall is, but...
The toe would be the base of the retaining wall in this case.
Okay, gotcha.
The bottom of the hill.
Like where it's sitting on some
Exactly.
stable ground, you don't want to mess with
Right,
that.
right.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else that'd like to speak in favor of the application? Okay, I don't see anybody else. So is there anybody that'd like to speak in opposition? Mr. Osterfeld?
Hi, excuse me. My name is Kevin Osterfeld. I live at 272 Sunny Acres Drive. On the map you're looking at, I'm the big lot right above him, yes, where the cursor is. So myself and two of my neighbors, both of whom are here tonight, are certainly by far the most impacted. One of my neighbors would argue he's more impacted than I would, but I would argue the opposite. The point is, we're both impacted, potentially impacted. What this is all about, 100%, well, let me back up and clear something up. I wasn't sure, the board had a little bit of discussion at the beginning, and I couldn't quite make out everything that was said. There is contiguous green space. Did you realize that? No, it's not. It is that lot and the one above that. Right
To the
there.
direct north.
Yeah, that too that's a 1 acre piece of green space. I know that because my lot is contiguous to that. But at any rate, so what this is all about, 100%, is the view. I mean, that's why we're there. Mr. Rose, I thought, did just as he should have done, which is he contacted me, explained what he proposed to do. We talked about it, and I shared with him what I intend to share with you. Again, what in my mind is most important is the view. The whole reason all of us up there paid 50% or 70% more or whatever for our homes is because the view. You put that home and put it on any street without the view, and the value is substantially different. I don't know if any of you happened up there, and if you did, you would know what we meant. So having said that, that's what we're all here to protect. It's not surprising that nobody on Riverby is objecting, because there's no one on Riverby whose view he could possibly impact almost no matter what he does. What we're looking at and what I told Mr. Rose is, I don't really have a big problem with it. This time of year, yes, I just see part of his roof. When the foliage is down, I can see his whole house. I'm directly above him. I have, as you can see, I think probably the largest piece of contiguous property line with him. When his house is moving from the 45-foot to the 15-foot setback, that's my setback. He's moving to my property. So having said that, I feel like I very much have a dog in the fight here. So my point is, or where I'd like to see this go is, I'm asking the board that if you pass this, you put two conditions on there. One is that the elevation of his roof is no higher than it is today at any point. And by elevation, there are different meanings. What I mean is number of feet above sea level, so that his roof line cannot be any more into my view than it is today. Obviously, that's very important. Additionally, his house, the highest point on his house can move no further east than it is today, because even if the highest point of his roof didn't change, if that roof line moved to the east, every foot it moves to the east, it probably cuts off another, I don't know, mathematically 20 or 30 feet of the river view for us, if that makes sense. Does the board follow what I mean there? Well, I won't ask a question, but hopefully you follow what I mean. So those would be the two things I asked the board to condition. The highest point of the roof doesn't move further east, and the highest point of the roof is no higher in number of feet above sea level than it is today. And again, like I said, this is just, it's all about the view. That's why I'm here. That's why anybody that's in opposition, I'm sure, is in opposition. And if anybody that's not here, they're not in opposition because it does not affect their view. That's all I have.
Any questions for Mr. Osterfeld?
Oh, we're not going to let this go by without a question.
Lots of
from Mr.
questions.
Osterfeld. So, Mr. Osterfeld, if they were to build the house within the area which they can by matter of right, that is, taking it, well, that's considered northwardly, actually closer to your property, I guess.
Yeah, west, I think.
What was it considered westerly?
A little, kind of, probably west-northwest.
Northwest. Does that impact you?
It depends on where the highest point of their roof line is. That's what I'm saying. I can't tell by looking at, the drawings here and the drawings I put up, or that were put up there. I can't tell where the peak of his roof is today as opposed to where the peak of it will be when this is all done. The answer is I don't know. I just know that if you take the angles and you look at the common sense of the angle, as he pushes his highest point to the east, he's more in my view.
Who else has a question for Mr. Osterfeld? So have you had a chance, besides what we've seen, I think you said you talked to Mr. Rose?
I did.
Have you examined these questions or anything with architects or engineers or anything who would say, yep, that is higher, or no, it's not, or do you?
No, I have not. What I did was I said to Mr. Rose, I said, at the meeting, I will ask the board, for the condition, the exact condition I'm asking for, but no, I haven't talked with his architect or any of that type of thing. I'm not sure they would know. They would probably have to do some work to figure out, here's the current high point, and here's what the future high point would be.
Yeah. Hey, Allison, can you bring up this drawing, but with the color? It shows the existing footprint within the proposed, I think, or vice versa. Okay, let's see here. So the red's the proposed, yellow's existing.
And when you're looking at this drawing, this is the west.
Oh, that's west, where your arrow is west?
Okay, let's get
This
this.
is west.
Yeah, so her pointer right now is on my
your
property.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I got you.
I think that's Mr. Adams' property right there, where the pointer was. Right there, yeah.
It's not your,
That's Mr. Osterfeld's property.
I think that's my property.
Yeah.
The line is here, so
Oh.
really it could go
Oh, I
either way.
get it. It could be right there, yes.
It could be
Okay,
either
can
way.
we flip back to that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Overs, what were you going to say?
So your concern, I'm trying to get the east-west orientation, is the house not be further,
If the high point of the house, I don't know how to do it other than this. If here's the slope, his house is here and I'm up here. If the high point of the house moves this way, he blocks more of my view. And that would be, in this case, moving the high point to the east, I believe, would block more of my view.
all right, so, but to understand it, if they built inside the setbacks, it blocks more of your view?
Can we rotate this?
That's the question I can't answer because I don't know how the house will be constructed. If the peak of the house is going to be exactly in the center of the house or offset one way or the other, I can't answer that.
Yeah. I'm going to try to rotate it.
Does that make sense?
It does, but it almost argues to push the house as far.
Well, in a way, it could argue that. But again, since I don't know how that house is going to be constructed versus how the current one is, I can't say. I understand what you're saying.
All right, thanks.
So looking at that drawing, that the new footprint for sure is further east, which is towards the bottom, right?
Yes.
Towards the bottom.
Which is what his concern is.
Well, the deck.
Well, the red
Yes.
outline, okay?
This is
Yeah.
east.
Yeah,
Yeah, when I say east, it's not like due east, it's not sitting exactly, I mean, so that's what we talked about, was kind of west-northwest versus kind of east-southeast. It's not due east, I don't think.
yeah. Generally, when you look at a drawing like that, the bottom is south, but this one's flipped,
That's right.
so the north is actually to the right on this one.
Yes.
That is correct.
I tried to rotate it.
Just to
Didn't
keep it,
happen.
interesting. So, is your concern not so much that the house moves a little bit east, but that high point?
Yeah,
Or can you
you'd
say
have to
for sure?
see how my property is. I have, over 4 acres there, so I have a lot of land between my house and his, but my property today literally goes up within a couple of feet of his driveway. It's very close. And it's pretty darn steep right through there. So how close he is to my property line, honestly, that doesn't really bother me, because he's pretty well covered. The topography is what it is. It's just all about the view.
So the 17-foot setback doesn't bother you at all?
Well,
As long
wouldn't
as
say-
as long as the highest points are not further obstructing your view?
I would say For the most part, that's probably fair. I mean, anytime you have 60 feet by right, and it goes from 60 to 17, it's a little, I mean, doesn't bother me at all, it's probably a little strong, but I can live with it.
I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. I was trying to clarify
Right.
that you don't really care that much about how close the structure comes to your property.
In this particular case, just because of the topography and the size of my lot, it's not a big deal.
I'll say that.
And I think the questions that we are asking is really to try to help us understand what the real limitations are here. I mean, the way that you worded it was the highest point current, don't move it any further east and don't move it any further up. It may be more complicated than that to try to keep your view exactly the same way as it is.
Can you explain what you mean by it could be more complicated? What could be more complicated?
The roof lines, what angles the roof lines are at and where they really do end up. I can think of the geometry here as getting pretty messy, but the real bottom line is you don't want your view to change any.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. If the board were able to come and stand on my deck or my next door neighbor's deck or Mark Ayers' deck and look, you'd know what we meant like that. I mean, it's there this time of year. Like I said, it's not bad. When the leaves are off the trees, it's fairly prominent, and I don't want it to get any worse.
I've been up there. I understand.
Now, if he, so that east, recollecting back to your comments, Alice, at the beginning, that east setback, which is 62 feet, 40, that's a front yard?
Yes.
Right? And what's the minimum front yard?
In the AA district, the minimum is 50 feet.
50 feet. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Yes.
staff question.
Yes.
If the applicant changed his mind and didn't do this plan, but wanted to do a house within the current, on the current site as is, but wanted to make it taller, which would obstruct the view even more, are there any restrictions on that? Staying within the current setbacks?
There would not be unless he exceeded the 35 feet in height that,
So he could go about 5 feet higher, and there wouldn't be any problem with that.
right.
So he testified, Mr. Rose testified just a minute ago that he's looking at 30 feet in height from grade, which is a little bit different from what Mr. Osterfeld's talking about as far as sea floor elevation. So we don't know. I guess we can't, yeah, there's some variables here, depends on where it's measured from and stuff like that, to know if the height, certainly within code as far as height goes.
And Mr. Johnson, just for the record, if he were to raise his house and rebuild, he would have to come back and get that same reduced setback that he has today, which, if he weren't able to get that, that pushes his house further down the hill in a very tight, steep area, which would squeeze his footprint substantially or add a ton of expenditure to shoring up the hill beneath him. So is that practical? No. Is it possible? Yes. Is it practical? No. And the reason I want to make sure you understand that is because that's not a fair trade-off here, because when we purchase the homes that we purchased above it, we do that with the knowledge of what's below us and the potential impact on the view. When we look at that, we figure that's not a potential impact on the view, because if he ever did what he's doing, his footprint would be so small that practically speaking, you couldn't build a house kind of worth building there, which is the whole reason he wants to move it.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Osterfeld? Very interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on opponents now. Do we have any other opponents? Yes, sir. Could you come forward?
Good evening. Mark Ayer, 268 Sunny Acres. I'm the lot on the other side of Mr. Oaks. So at the end of the private drive on Sunny Acres, we have Mr. Osterfeld and Mr. Oaks, and then myself are at the end of the private drive. So if you look at the map, if you saw where Kevin is on the other side, 2 houses down from Kevin, 2 lots over, right there, correct. And the main reason I'm here, and the biggest concern I have is, as Kevin said, we're all up there for the view. And I've known Mr. Early forever and respect him, and they're all down below Riverby, and nobody in Riverby would have an issue with this because it's their view is not impacted by any means by this. So my concern is today, you know, we grant a variance for a setback that pushes the houses closer to us, maybe blocks our view more. I know Mr. Adams plans on submitting an application for the other lot for a house. He's going to come here for a variance. His house is going to be pushed up closer to us, obstructing our view more. And it's almost like, you know, we've been there, we've got big investments in our homes, and we want to protect those and not have to a variance, you know, that's going to pop up and encroach upon our view and block our view. So I'm opposed to starting this process that could have no end in sight. With the age of the houses on Riverby, you're going to have just a flood of variances with people wanting to, you know, hey, look, let's scrap that house, build a little bigger house, move it up the hill, increase the height, and at the end of the day, you know, we might not have any view. So I'm here to protect our view, and I know Mr. Trout is here for Mr. Oaks, and I know Kevin, we're all here to protect our view, and that is a big concern of mine.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Ayer?
Yes, sir. If this board were to grant the variance with conditions that it doesn't increase the height of existing structure, does that address your concern, or are you still concerned?
I'm concerned mainly about the precedents that we start, because you start moving the houses, and then, okay, the height's fine, and then next time, okay, as long as we leave the height fine this time, we'll grant the variance. You know, what happens next month or the month after when Mr. Adams comes in, how do we keep, you know, all this development come from encroaching upon us and our views? And so that's a fair question, but I guess I really can't answer that unless I saw some plans. But my biggest concern is the precedents that we'd start here today that will just keep spiraling downhill until we basically, you know, there's nothing left of our view.
Any other questions for Mr. Ayer?
I do. How much of Mr. and Mrs. Rose's home can you see now?
Like Kevin said, not much right now with the trees, but in the fall, you can see pretty much everything.
But that's all the homes on Riverby? Below you?
Correct. Well, yes, correct. But it's Mr. Rose. It's that house right there. The Steins kind of sits down below. We can't really see that because that sits at a different elevation. And those are the only 2 homes, correct.
The view that you would like to protect, and I think you see the board struggling and you, property owners, struggling for the right words and terminology to use, and that's the intent behind the question. Are you trying to protect the view to the river, or the natural view even between the river and your property?
I mean, in a perfect world, I'd say both, but mainly the view to the river is what we're trying to, that's why we're all up there, is the view to the river. So that's what we're trying to protect. Instead of looking at the back of someone's house, we want to look, you know, at the river. That's why we spent what we did and invested what we did up there.
And if we could find a way to define that in better, more technical terms that you could go back and measure and repeat, then that's the real intent, is the river view, not necessarily the trees in front of it or anything else.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just a moment, sir. We're addressing the applicant here. We can get back to you in just a second, okay? Is there any other opponents?
Well, what I had stated relative to what Mr. Ayers said.
We can, we'll have to ask you back up in a moment if that'd be okay.
It's fine.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Trout.
Everybody likes this podium.
My name is Joe Trouth. My address is 1 East 4th Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. I'm representing Ken Oakes and his wife, who own the lot east of Mr. Osterfeld's lot, and west, and east of Mr. Ayer's lot. I'm here to, first of all, clarify something in the staff notice. The staff notice indicated that there had been a 30-foot variance previously.
45.
Well, but in the public hearing notice, it says 30.
Okay.
So it is 45. My concern is the legal requirement for an area variance simply has not been met, and I'll go through it step by step. First of all, there is absolutely no evidence on geotechnical, and we're dealing with hillsides here. There's been no evidence other than people making bland statements, unsupported by any evidence that there will be no slippage or whatever, if you don't touch this or you don't touch that. Secondly, there was no evidence on any of the area variance criteria. Many of the homes on Riverby might be in the future torn down. And to my knowledge, this township has never in its history granted a 72% variance. That is what they're asking for. 72% of 60 feet is 17 feet. That is unheard of, it's unprecedented, and it would create a terrible precedent for the township and for future cases coming before you. The criteria, as you see them, number one is the property in question will yield reasonable return. It's already yielding a reasonable return. There's already a home there. And even if you tore down the home and put it back on the same exact footprint, it would still yield a reasonable return. Or whether there can be any beneficial use of the property without the variance. Certainly there's already a beneficial use of the property. It's a single-family property. And again, it could be torn down, could be rebuilt, and there's beneficial use. So that criteria clearly has not been met. Second one is what I just referred to. The variance is not substantial. Well, if 72% variance is not substantial, then I don't know what is substantial. That criteria has not been met. The essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered, or whether adjoining property owners would suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance. We've already heard from two property owners, and my property owner, Mr. Oakes, believes that there would be a substantial detriment to their property as a result of a 72% variance and moving this home to the, we're getting our directions a little bit confused, to the north or northeast. The variance would not adversely affect the delivery of government services. I don't think that really is an issue. The property owner's predicament can be feasibly obviated through some method other than a variance. Certainly can. He's got a big lot there. He can do other things within the footprint allowed by the code. So that has not been met. The spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed and substantial justice be done by granting the variance. How can the spirit and intent behind the zoning code requirement of a 60-foot rear yard be met by a 17-foot rear yard? Simply didn't happen, or wouldn't happen as a result of granting the variance. So of the 6 criteria in your own code and under Ohio law, 5 of the 6 have not been met by any evidence presented at this hearing. Number one. Number two, the fifth one, number 4, is not really even applicable. So technically, the 5 that pertain, none of them have been met. The letter of the applicant certainly doesn't present any evidence. There's been really no expert testimony on any of these 5 applicable criteria by the applicant. And we think for that reason, this variance cannot be granted, and the homeowner should go back to the drawing boards and attempt to build within the legal footprint. And that is the 60 feet. Because once you tear the house down, you start over, and you've got to observe the tenets of the code. So I think the decision that this board has to make is, have any of these criteria been met by the evidence presented here tonight in the record, number 1, and what kind of precedent would this create the next time a tear down comes in before you and wants a substantial variance from what the code says. You, in effect, are guardians of the zoning code, and it can't be willy-nilly enforced and allow something of a 72% magnitude. So for that reason, we believe that this variance must be denied. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there some questions for Mr. Trouth?
I have a couple.
Mr. Overstreet.
Mr. Trouth, you said we've never granted a 72% variance. Have you gone back and looked because on what we do for flag lots and corner lots?
I am basing this on 41 years' experience of appearing before boards such as this, and since your code was adopted, and I forget exactly what year, I've never experienced that type of a variance being granted. But the exact answer to your question is no, I haven't looked
flag
through
lots, I think you might want to check that
record.
out on flag lots and corner lots. The benefit or disadvantage of doing this for a long time, too, sitting with this code. And then you stated that the adjoining property owners would suffer as a result of the variance. And I was confused just a second by that, because is it the variance that they're suffering because of, or the fact that there will be another building constructed?
Well, a new and larger...
That's kind of coming down, I think, maybe to some of the real key issues the board struggled
A
with.
new and larger building would be constructed on this site, and that affects at least 3 of the people that you've heard from tonight, including my client.
Because the variance permits them to build it.
Yes. New and larger building. But my main concern is, have any of these criteria been met? I think not.
Understood.
By the homeowner. And the burden is on the homeowner, not on the adjacent property owners. But you've heard from 3 property owners that think their values would be affected because of the effect on the views of a much larger home with a much larger footprint that they would see entirely during the winter. Not to mention, and I've had my client point out and other people point out, that there are some other homes that may well be tear downs in the near future on Riverby, and that creates the kind of precedent that I don't think you want to create.
Thank you.
Who else has a question for Mr. Trouth? I've got a question for you, Mr. Trouth. So substantial, when you look at 72% is substantial, you look at the numbers, but would you agree that sometimes there's more that goes into whether it's substantial or not? For example, if you're backing on right to somebody else's backyard as opposed to if you're backing on to a desert?
There are other factors, but again, a 72%, a lot of times you see a 10% variance, 15% variance, those kind of variances are common that I've seen before BZAs, and I think you would probably agree with that. But there can be other factors, but the 72% in and of itself, because it is a rear yard setback is very troublesome from a precedent standpoint, especially when it's affecting property owners adjacent and above.
Okay. And then the feasibility question, looks like within the building footprint, he could move the building around, but then we had evidence that there's some significant topography there, so it seems like it's maybe not feasible to move it around that lot very much. There's a flat, from what I've heard, there's a flat spot. That's kind of where you need to build, otherwise you're having severe drop-offs and stuff.
There really hasn't been any concrete evidence before this board about that. My concern is it could be built on the same footprint as the previous home, but probably not with the setback, because the setback would then need the 15-foot variance, which is a 25% variance from the current code.
If they went back, well, that's probably not a fair question, but I'll just throw it out. You can not answer. But if they went back and said, okay, we don't get this variance, there's a 30-foot in place, and we have to build our house more compact and maybe build it up, but within code, again, we don't know for sure. Is it possible there could be more impact from the views and stuff?
I doubt it for this reason. I've reviewed the covenants of Riverby subdivision. They have very strict architectural covenants. I don't even know if there's evidence before this board that this plan has even gone before them, because their plans would have to be approved by the Riverby Homeowners Association. And again, there's no evidence that that has even happened to date. So I doubt if much more than is actually there today could be built because of those subdivision restrictions that are in place. And they are restrictions and covenants on the Riverby subdivision.
I think we did hear he could go 5 feet higher. Did we not hear that?
The Riverby subdivision allows 35 feet, which is the same as your code. However, there are architectural restrictions, which, as you know, are somewhat more subjective than the 35 feet. So the subdivision homeowners association would have to vote, and it's my understanding that there has to be 75% vote to approve that.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Traub? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've heard from anybody. We'll get back to you in a moment, sir, but is there any other opponents? Okay, and Mr. Messerly asked if he could come up and address a point. I'd like to hear from him if the board would agree. Would you please come back up? Just repeat your name for the record, if you would, please.
Yeah, my name is Stan Messerly, and I just wanted to clarify something. Mr. Adams will indeed, and he's actually filed the application for a potential variance from the board, but our variance request, and we look to be in front of the board in the next few months, would be a request to move down the hill, not up the hill. It was stated earlier by Mr. Ayers that we were going to request to move up the hill towards his house, but we're going to, we will be moving down.
Thanks for that clarification. I don't think we need to worry about that for this case, but, okay, appreciate that. Okay, anybody else on this? Mr. Rose, do you have anything further after you've heard the comments and testimony? If you do, please speak into the microphone.
Well, just as far as being able to build in that area, and we're trying to get our plans right now with the variance so that we go further with the final plan. So those can all be adjusted. I'm all about being a good neighbor with roof height. And, but because of the topography, they gave us 3 sets of plans to start with. And of course, we picked the one that we preferred the best, was a little bit wider. And our builder is concerned that just being 5 feet wider, looking down the hill there, that was going to add significant cost. So we went back and had another meeting with him last Monday and trimmed about 5 feet off, and, he said that could save $40,000, $50,000 there. So we are really restricted on the topography there. And as far as the point, you can see on those, on the map there, their backyards are 500 to 600 feet from our house. It's not, we're not doing 20-foot setbacks or 10-foot setbacks. That's a significant distance there by us moving, another 30 feet to their property line.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Rose.
Mr. Oberschmidt?
Did, Mr. Trouth made the point that there is not any true expert testimony as to the soil conditions, the topography and things like that. Is there any of that information that you have currently available?
Not yet, because, right, we're haven't finalized the plans, or we've got a lot further to go, but we just want to get the variance so that we can go ahead and proceed with the plans. But, as far as soil analysis, no, we haven't done that yet. We have an existing foundation there, so we're hoping we don't get into any issues.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
have one
Yes.
question. It appears that the area that you're requesting the variance, the 17 feet, that's where your garage is.
Right.
That structure's a garage, and that level, height level, that garage will be low. It's
Right.
not going to be just
Yeah, that's one-story garage. Well within the footprint of the house from, I would think, up there, just looking down logically, it's going to be tucked into the toe of the hill.
Any more questions, Mr. Hayes? Do you
Yes,
have a
I do.
question?
You mentioned that the cost, there's a significant cost differential for as little as a 5-foot movement. What direction is that 5 feet in? Is it straight down the hill towards moving the rear of the house further
Yes.
down the hill?
Yes, and towards the green space, because it gets a lot steeper there.
So it's almost perpendicular to the ISO elevation lines.
Right,
Straight down, 5 feet straight down, what may cost $10,000 a foot.
right. And I did talk to Ken Oakes, just trying to be a good neighbor. I contacted him by phone and talked to him last week, and as I recall the conversation, he said, "I can't even see your house."
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. I think Mr. Trouth would like to have a comment after he heard those remarks. Would the board like to entertain further comments? Okay.
Again, the criteria for the area variance number 5 says, the property owner's predicament can be feasibly obviated through some other method other than a variance. The property owner here has created the predicament. So the predicament isn't because of the property, isn't because of anything.
If I could just jump in a second. Appreciate your comments, but if you have some factual information for us, let us hear the facts rather than...
That's factual. It is factual that the property owner is creating the predicament by asking for something other than what's on the property today or within the code.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else? I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Okay.
No, that was my point.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks. Okay, did anybody else like to make any comments? Okay, I think we've heard from everybody. So, before we close the public hearing, we've heard some remarks that there's maybe not enough information. We heard some remarks about sight lines, stuff like that. So I'm going to ask the board if they feel like they want any further information, if they're ready to move forward. Personally, I feel like I would be ready to move forward, but I don't want to close the public hearing if the board might want some more information.
I am a little concerned that we don't have, and it was hard to read, look at the elevations, and I think Mr. Rose had some specific elevations. I think maybe if we could see the elevation of the proposed structure, since two of the three folks here are worried about the visibility, it might be helpful. Other than that,
If you hand it to me now, can I keep it?
Yes.
Okay.
There's not the copy.
Those are heights.
Mr. Oberschmidt, did you?
Well, I think there are two pieces of information I'm just continuing to struggle to understand. One of them is the height and where that height is, east versus west, or however we're referring to it. And then the second is understanding what the alternatives are in terms of soil conditions and topography on the on alternative places on that site. You know, certainly Mr. Trouth has pointed out the lack of any sort of expert opinion on that, as opposed to just the homeowners and others' opinion. So those would be the two pieces of information I'm struggling with a bit factually. You know, I don't know where this, as Mr. Hayes said, all of a sudden becomes a little bit of a geometry problem to figure out where this is this higher than, and where is the existing height lines as opposed to this height line.
Right.
I understand your comment now about the geometry.
It's a high school geometry problem, but there's a lot of moving parts in it. And Mr. Chair, you're trying to conclude whether we close the public hearing or
Right.
not.
Yes.
I see this issue and trying to judge it, not so much a variance of the setback, even though that's the technical variance here. It's more of an issue of protecting the sight lines there. And the definition of those sight lines, I would like to have a little bit more help at, not just in the design of the house, but in being able to put that into restrictions on the granting of the variance. How do we best measure them, from what point, and taking into consideration what points that are to be kept in the view? I don't know how to do that yet, and I think that's that's the information that I would like. You agree?
Yeah, I do. It's a bit of a struggle we're getting different bits and pieces, and I don't think we have enough in front of us with the height and where we're starting from.
And I guess my take on it is it's somewhat incumbent upon the applicant to come forward with additional information rather than us to struggle to try and define what it is that we need to make a decision, when in fact then we could get all that additional information and still have an adverse decision. So that's why I'm inclined, unless the board objects, to close the hearing and move forward with the decision.
Can you say that again? Because I thought you were heading to a different conclusion.
My feeling is based on some of the testimony that I've heard tonight, and I'm not sure that additional information is going to be helpful for me in making a decision, and I'm not sure it's this board's role to micromanage every applicant and every application we receive to then get enough information that we may or may not be able to make a decision. So that's why I was saying I would be inclined to close the hearing. However, if the board can articulate with some specifics what it is they'd like to see, I'd be more than happy to ask if the applicant wants to pursue that first of all, and then keep it open. But I think the board would need to provide some specifics.
I think I agree. I mean, we have an aerial view of the existing home, and superimposed on that what the new one will be. It might be helpful if we had something like this new one, the new exhibit, where we have the existing one with this one superimposed on it, but I'm not sure that it would actually help in the end. I mean, it might, but...
It's an interesting display, though.
And whether this is going to be farther east or farther, how it's going to go farther east, or if it does, or west, or whatever.
Superimposing the roof line, though, at least on it.
Right.
And it's not going to be a straight line across it because they're different orientations.
Right. But looking straight on it might help, I don't know.
Well, if somebody would like to try and articulate with some specifics what they'd like to see, then we can keep the public hearing open and continue. If not, then I would tend to close the hearing. Would you like to try, Mr. Overschmidt?
I can say what I would like to see, but if the majority of the board wants to close the hearing, I understand that. As Johnson suggested, I would like to see this drawing superimposed with the roof line of the existing structure. Have to be from a couple of different angles, showing it where it is on the site and where it will be on the site, to understand that. Because you can show it depending where you set it. And then the second thing is, I personally would like to see more detail about the cost impact and really the geotechnical impact of moving it within the permitted setback areas. And then the third thing, and this one's really for staff, is like some clarification as to whether the existing 45-foot variance was done in such a way that it was specific to a structure, or it applies to remodeling and additions to the structure.
That's a good point.
Do we also want to see something, some kind of survey or engineer's report about the land and what any adjacent property owners, whether this property, this change would affect their land?
I think that would be...
The erosion or
be in
whatever.
a geotech, and that was my initial question, is how much of this soil is going, ground, soil, whatever term you would like to use, is going to be impacted with the new structure versus the old structure? How much is going to be dug out, removed, and what's going to be needed to put in for the foundation and the footers of that site? That was my initial concern. And I'm assuming there's been some sort of geotech work done, or some analysis from Hillside of some sort.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from the board is they'd like to see some additional information, which would be a drawing of the proposed with the roof line superimposed on the existing structure, so the board can determine if there's going to be an impact of the relative heights of the structures. Detail of the cost impact of moving the structure within the permitted building footprint as opposed to getting the variance. The geotechnical impact of such construction, and including the impact on the adjacent properties, and how much fill and excavation would be required in the volumes, and also with regard to the existing 45-foot rear setback variance, what are the limits and controls that were imposed on that variance? And also more detail drawing as to where the new structure will be sited is relative to the building footprint of the existing building. So I will pose that question back to, it's quite a bit of information. I'll pose that question back to Mr. Rose if he's interested in obtaining that and providing it to us. Maybe you could get up to the microphone if you want. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm an airline pilot, so I haven't really built many houses. I mean, construction, soil, angles, all that. I guess if that's the requirement, we could do that. Be a lot of added expense, I would think.
Well,
soil and all that.
Keep in mind as well that that's just additional information. That's not going to determine what the board's decision is going to be.
Right. So,
I mean, one option you could have if you want to, of course you'd have to refile at a future time, is simply to withdraw the case. You could evaluate what you've heard here and come back with a new case if you wanted to proceed with this design. I'm not saying you have to do that, it's just an option you have.
but if we pursue with all the new information, it would just be a continuance?
Yes.
So we would just look into that. I think we would probably have to do the continuance, and
Okay, so you'd be agreeable to getting this information. We would continue the public hearing. Open.
right?
Okay.
I don't, it might be in your best interest to either have your architect and/or whoever preparing those reports attend. So, as you said, you're not in the construction industry, you might not be able to answer some of the technical questions we may have. If someone's going to prepare those reports.
So will we get a list of what the board's requiring tonight then? Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so we will keep the public portion of the hearing open with regard to obtaining this additional information and further questions the board might have relative to this information. And I think at this time we'll ask for a motion to continue this case to next month.
So moved.
Second.
Had a motion and a second to continue case 6-2014. Roll call?
Aye.
Fred Hayes,
Aye.
Rick Overton.
Aye.
Brian Johnson,
Aye.
Brian Allen.
Aye. Okay, Mr. Rose, so you can get with Allison, she can give you the list of information that we're looking for. All right. Is there any further business? Any further business from the board?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.